Sorry, there we go. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We are here today to listen to Becky, who's going to talk to us about how ancient Greece has influenced modern day society. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And when you're ready, off you go.
Cool. I'm just going to wait for the present now to work. Is this working as a present?
Yeah, that's right. We can see you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So I've been interested in ancient Greece and particular Greek mythology since as long as I can remember. As I kind of said before this, I've been a massive fan of Percy Jackson books. If anyone hasn't read them, you should, because they're so good. It's like up there with Harry Potter. And so I wanted to do a presentation on this because I thought it was really interesting. It links to a lot of books I've read very recently. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about all of the influences because that would take me days. But I think I'm going to focus, as this is Litsoc, on the literary influence, theatre and film, philosophy, and since law is what I want to do when I leave, law and politics and all that kind of thing as well. So the literary influence, firstly and quite importantly, the Greeks are known to kind of have invented poetry in forms. Apollo was obviously the god of poetry alongside many other things. Poetry was at the times kind of intended to be sung or recited, and the stories that they told were mainly myths, so like a combination of like legend and religious belief and kind of vague references to some kind of historical event. And this, like the writing style that they had, and as well as the myths, has had such a massive impact on literature in the modern age and throughout history. So the first Western written literature was the Iliad. After reading it, it's quite clear to me that it's still relevant today. Everything, the characters and the trials that they kind of have to face throughout it, I personally feel like has a lot of relatability in it, which I think is quite good. Obviously, John Milton wrote one of the reasons he wrote Paradise Lost is because he wanted to create his own Christian epic, like the Odyssey and the Iliad. And then, as you can see, with things like Heroes by Stephen Fry and Mythos are really good books. They kind of give an insightful, kind of almost witty way of telling these stories that are quite accessible. So I would highly recommend reading that as well. Obviously, Percy Jackson is essentially just based off the mythology. Harry Potter is mainly based on kind of folklore and Celtic mythology, but the references to like centaurs and the three-headed dog also references back to Greek mythology. And Suzanne Collins, who wrote The Hunger Games, said that one of her initial influences for writing the kind of idea of the children being sent off to fight linked back to the idea of the labyrinth, where they had to send teenagers to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. Which I thought was quite interesting because it's set in a kind of post-apocalyptic world, but the essence of the story is based way back in Greek mythology. So theatre and film, it links again to literature because it always kind of based off literature. But the Athenians alone established two dramatic genres of tragedy and comedy, kind of based around celebrations of, I think it's pronounced Dionysus, but forgive me if I'm wrong. And tragedy is said to exist in Greece around 600 BC, so it's quite early that kind of genre was created. So even in like Shakespeare's works, there are so many references to classical mythology, including Midsummer Night's Dream, with characters such as Theseus, based off the Greek hero Theseus. And musicals also have references. It's a mildly tenuous link, but Legally Blonde, the musical, has a Greek chorus in it, which obviously isn't exactly the same as the Greek choruses of the initial creation, but it's a reference. And then obviously films, there's Troy and Hercules, which are kind of retelling of the stories. One is a lot more upbeat than the other, but it's a similar kind of thing that even in today's 21st century, it's still very relevant and stories are still being told even now, even though it kind of seems old and almost outdated to some. So politics and law. Obviously, this is what I want to do, law. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk about it. One of the first like written codes of law were the first forms of prose, and were appearing by the end of the 7th century. So it's very early. There are significant differences in Athenian law courts. They had no lawyers, no prosecutors, no crime investigating police, but there were certain ways that the cases were presented, and the ways that the court was structured, where you can kind of see the beginnings of the complex system that is now in place today. And politics, the word politics is a Greek word. It means kind of affairs of the city or state. And other Greek words that we've kind of taken include democracy and monarchy and tyranny. So those words are still incredibly influential in today's society. And I think one of the main points, which I'm going to link to the philosophy later on, is the fact that they thought very critically about their political and legal systems. They had a massive influence on the kind of idea that you can criticize your own system, and you can't just assume that your way of thinking is the best way, which I think is quite a big problem at the moment. I think maybe we could use some of their influence in that small sense. And I think it was this critical thinking that's probably their greatest legacy. Probably more so than their kind of ideals of democracy in Athens and the kind of extreme social control in Sparta. You can obviously say that this polarization is quite similar in some aspects to today's politics. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that there are a lot of parallels between the competitions almost between Athens and Sparta in today's society, and the kind of polarization of politics and the ideals between kind of like totalitarian rule and entire democracy and socialism, all that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. So finally, philosophy. I'll come back to the Good Place reference later. That's a whole separate thing. But ancient Greek philosophers, most people I think would be able to name one. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that front, but I think most people will be able to name, Socrates or Plato or Aristotle. And this philosophy has had a big impact on our thinking, as I was saying earlier, in terms of law and politics. They had this massive emphasis on kind of critical thinking and, reason and inquiry. And I think that's probably their biggest legacy, on a serious note, is this kind of influence on really, really thinking through issues and thinking through problems, and something that I think is really valuable in education, in just general life. I think is something that the Greeks really emphasized, and I think that's really important. And just to end on the kind of sillier note, The Good Place is a TV show kind of showing again that Greek philosophy, along with lots of other forms of philosophy and ethics, is even relevant in kind of popular culture. But yeah, The Good Place makes many references to their teachings, and I just thought this was quite a funny scene. I don't know if that's just because I'm a bit nerdy, but yeah, I just really liked this part of The Good Place because it's funny. But yeah, that's it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Big round of applause, please, for Becky. That was so fascinating. Very good. Okay, have we got any questions that we would like to ask?
Well, no, I thought it was brilliant, Becky. Thanks very much. I was just wondering what you think, because there's obviously people sometimes talk about, why should we still study classics, or why study these sort of ancient texts or ancient languages? What would you say, sort of? I mean, you talked a lot today about the relevance of these texts and languages. What would your response be to someone who questions kind of the point or purpose of studying what you're planning to study?
I think it's incredibly relevant. I think, particularly as I'm doing PRS as a subject, and we're learning about, Aristotle and virtue theory and all that kind of thing. And I think about the way that they, as I said, the way that they emphasize critical thinking and kind of questioning your views and not just kind of settling with an absolutist kind of view. I personally think that it's really relevant. And I think if you just ignore everything that the Greeks kind of worked for, that would be quite, in my opinion, quite dangerous to education, to accepting political views and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Daisy's got her hand raised. Daisy, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of because it's such a broad range of philosophy, do you think in many ways the modern way that we've interpreted a lot of the ideologies and philosophies that they put forward, we've wrecked it is the wrong word, but maybe we've misinterpreted aspects of it? Like you spoke about education, the way that they looked at education was incredibly difficult. Do you think that there's kind of a cause for us to bring forward the true interpretations of these philosophies and maybe better our modern world?
Yeah, I think having varied interpretations of stuff can't be too harmful, I suppose. I think people trying to simplify and almost kind of take away the varied aspects of thought is not great. But obviously their whole education system was flawed in many different ways. But yeah, I think definitely the emphasis that they had on critical thinking and emphasis that they had in different philosophical thought, I think it should be brought back almost, and people should really take more effort and care in thinking about how that can be applied into education. I think also at younger ages, and really challenging and thinking about things, because I think on a personal level, that sort of thing has only really come into fruition in sixth form for me. Obviously it's different because it's more discussion based and I'm taking 3 essay subjects. But yeah, I certainly think that having that at a younger age people would be able to challenge each other's views and have different varied opinions and kind of accept that, I think, a bit more.
Definitely. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question. Seeing as it's World Book Day today, I wonder which of the Greek stories was your favourite and why?
That's hard.
I know it's a mean question.
I think probably the Theseus' story, just because I think it's just a really interesting story, and it's the idea that he kind of betrays her in some way, and like at the end it's not great, but I think also if anyone hasn't read Heroes, you should absolutely read it, because it has all of the hero stories in them, and it just tells them so well. But yeah, so
thank you. I don't know if you've come across, they're probably a bit too young for you now, Becky, but there's a writer called Maz Evans who has written a series of books that start with Who Let the Gods Out, and it's about how all the Greek gods have managed to come to Earth, and it's all a bit chaotic, really. But yeah, there's 4 books in the series. They are really good. My daughter's reading them at the moment, and we've enjoyed them. Have we got any other questions at all? No. Well,
okay, that's great. I was only going to ask about, because there's been a lot of recent rewritings of classical stories particularly from a gender perspective, from Pat Barker and other writers. I just wonder if you'd read many of those. That's trying to get more of the women, because obviously a lot of the classical writers, not all, are men, and this idea of female voices and women's voices. I don't know if you'd read any of those texts or had any thoughts on that, and how important that is, or how interesting that is.
Yeah, I think my mum bought me something called Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes, I think was the name, for Christmas, that I haven't yet read, but it's kind of an interpretation of all the female characters in Greek mythology, which I'm really interested to read. But I think it is really interesting because a lot of the time in Greek mythology, obviously, it's at the time, it's very of its time in that sense. But I think actually most of the female characters have quite complex stories, and being told a lot more, particularly by women, I think is really interesting, because you kind of get that a lot more instead of them being a supporting character that dies or is left somewhere or something like that. So yeah.
Lovely, thank you so much. Well, on behalf of the rest of the group, thank you so much for the presentation today. It was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Miss Kirby, did you have a question?
It wasn't really a question. I was just picking up what Mr. Birkinshaw said. I highly recommend reading Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls, which is a kind of sort of female retelling of the Iliad, which is really, really excellent. I loved it. So yeah, I really recommend adding that to your
read that.
It's really good.
Yes, brilliant. There is a copy in the library. Hasten to add. Oh yeah, 1,000 Ships, of course. Yeah, Maddie completely forgot about that one. That's a good one. Thank you so much, everybody, and take good care. And I will see you hopefully. It is also by Natalie Haynes. Yeah, you're right. And we'll see you hopefully live next week. So thank you. Take care, everybody.
Fantastic. What's next week's topic?
Thank you.
You know,
Oh, do you know what? I just need to go and check. I can't remember.
sorry, wasn't supposed to be a trick question. I
Hold on.
apologise.
No, it's okay. Let me check.
Post it later.
Yeah, I can post it later. Yeah, I can't remember what it is, but I will check.
Sorry, it was purely enthusiasm on my part. I apologise.
Oh, bless you. I will double check in a second.
Thank you.